Your presence here suggests that you're already a point of sanity in a world that desperately needs sanity. Active peace circles with all the personal qualities and the ways of being that they include are like vortexes of human evolution. Powerful ways to really embody maturity and bring sanity and healing to the world. So as you engage in issues and as you practice with our scenario tonight, keep this context in mind. Stabilize yourself in the big picture. It'll come in very handy. And again, thank you for being here and being willing to be a force for paradigm change. So let's dive in. That's not where we want to be. Session 4, deep nonviolence and the circle process. And we're going to start by going deeper into the heart of nonviolence. And why more on this? Because without the right orientation, active peace circles will never happen. The first thing you're likely to run into isn't people who aren't willing to do the process, but people who sincerely believe they don't have the time for it. There's a book group on Tuesdays. There's meditation on Thursdays. There's family time on the weekends. And all of that is well and good. And it's a huge part of our context in trying to make active peace circles happen. It's the busyness is a huge part of the challenge. And there's those people who might have the time but not want to do it. So you need to be really clear on why this is important, why it's urgent, why it's necessary for the survival of our species, so that you don't get discouraged. You need to come from a deep place of inner peace and unity so you can engage with people effectively, not judge them, not be attached to outcome, and trust in love with a capital L. Active peace circles are an expression of love, an expression of truth. And deep nonviolence is a useful way to frame all of that. And it leads us even deeper into love with a capital L. Deeper than the restorative mindset. And this is ultimately why I emphasize it so much. And I've studied nonviolence, I've thought a lot about it, and I have come up with these 2 core values that kind of boil it down. Uphold the basic dignity of every person, no exceptions, and lead with love and an open heart. So just take a moment and reflect on how these 2, what I call values, resonate with everything we've covered in the webinar. There's a way that they kind of gather that energy, and I think they're helpful for that reason. They can kind of distill a lot of principles in just very few words. And healing justice is deeply, consistently nonviolent. That's where the healing and the transformational potential lies. It's not in the outcomes. It's in the energy. It's in the intention. It's in the open-heartedness, the willingness to see the full humanity of others, to uphold their dignity and to lead with love no matter what. And so there's an unconditionality here. Love with a capital L is unconditional, makes no exceptions, and that's a paradigm shift. So healing justice, I believe, brings alive and carries forward the legacy of nonviolence and the vision of the beloved community that Martin Luther King Jr. held so dearly as really the core of what nonviolence was about, creating the beloved community. We talked about that in session number 1. And it's long been recognized that it takes a transpersonal kind of courage and commitment to practice deep nonviolence. Gandhi understood it, and he called it self-purification. And that's what they were doing for over 12 years in the ashram. Gandhi and his core cadre, they were preparing for over 12 years to face the beatings and the batons. Martin Luther King Jr. understood the importance of self-purification. He tended to call it personal commitment. And that's the prayer. That's the songs, the spirituals, the scripture, the community. It was necessary to do what they did. And I emphasize foundations and practices so much because active peace circles and issues like racism, sexual abuse, with those issues, we're in the most challenging territory there is. Not only is it interpersonal work, but it's just triggering territory because of our care, because of our interrelatedness, our interbeing. It's so easy to get challenged in this territory. So we need our own foundations, our own ways of cultivating psychological and spiritual maturity. And here's another way to say that. Gandhi and nonviolence is incomprehensible if it is thought to be a means of achieving unity rather than as the fruit of inner unity already achieved. So that sentence says a lot about what I've been trying to bring forth in the webinar. Foundations, personal capacities, an inner unity already achieved. And here's a quote by the British historian Toynbee about Gandhi and his campaign in India. He made it impossible for us to go on ruling India, but at the same time, he made it possible for us to abdicate without rancor and without dishonor. So that says volumes about the strategic power and the humanity of Gandhi's approach. And I'm aware that Gandhi has fallen out of fashion, that his imperfections have come forward. And even the word nonviolence has fallen out of fashion in some circles. But I'm pretty convinced we wouldn't be here having this webinar without the example that Gandhi gave us. We may not have heard of Martin Luther King Jr. without the example of nonviolence that Gandhi gave us and the inspiration that people like James Lawson and Bayard Rustin and John Lewis got from Gandhi's example, and they brought it to Martin Luther King Jr., and the rest is history. The nonviolence of the civil rights movement, which made it a movement that couldn't just be bombed out of existence because of the nonviolence and the masses of people that rallied around that. So with that as context, let's go deeper into the circle process. So these are right out of the basic stages document, which you should have, and I hope you've seen. We're really going to start with just looking at who's in the circle and unpack that a little bit more. So those harmed and their support are in the circle. And I want to emphasize that there is lots of support for harmed parties that comes in the preparation phase. So before we ever get to a circle, in an active peace circle process, we have the luxury of time to do what needs to be done to give people the support they need so they can show up fully and in that restorative mindset in the circle. And we include in that preparation any support people they want to bring into the circle itself. So that could mean one person sitting next to them, a friend, a family member. It could be two people, one person on either side of them, who are there as full participants in the circle, but they're there primarily as support for those harmed. And they don't have to be in the circle. This is always voluntary. Sometimes harmed parties will not want to participate in the circle. And it's possible in situations like that to look at having what we call a surrogate victim. Ideally, somebody who's experienced that harm, that type of harm, so that they can speak from very personal experience, looking the person who caused harm or the people who caused harm right in the eye, speaking powerfully from their experience, so that those who caused the harm can really feel that, and everyone in the circle can really feel it. Those who caused the harm are in the circle. And again, they can get a lot of support to show up fully in the preparation phase. And they get somebody. Usually it would just be one person sitting next to them, supporting them. And they also don't have to be in the circle. And we'll talk a little more about that later. It came up in one of the small groups that we did last week. One of the groups decided that if the James did not want to participate in the circle, they would still do it. So there's lots of ways to be creative and use what we have to foster repair and healing. Always community representatives in the circle, people representing the big picture. And this will be your role in the scenario tonight. And it's a very powerful role because you get to bring the big picture. You get to really tune in to the energy in the circle and speak to subtle things ripple effects that other people may not be focused on. So it's always a very key role. It's kind of, I hesitate to use the phrase high ground role because of some of our discussion last time, but it's just because you're just representing the community, there's just a real special energy around that. And hopefully you'll get a feel for that tonight in the scenario. Systems representatives, depending on the issue. So depending on the issue, you may want someone or a couple of people representing city government, perhaps the police department, perhaps a school district, perhaps a regulatory agency if we're talking about if the issue is something environmental. And we are out to change systems. So whenever it's appropriate, we want to bring in systems people into the circle and our facilitators. Always in restorative justice, it's 2 facilitators. It's the same with the active peace circles, with the addition of, and I feel like this will be very helpful, a 3rd facilitator whose main role is to take good notes. And the way I envision that role is someone who can really help hold the circle as a whole, while the other 2 facilitators are focused on running the process and individual needs. Somebody who can just really feel the energy of the circle as a whole would feel empowered to say, time out, we need to address something. So I think when we're dealing with challenging issues, having 3 people in that facilitator role will be very important. And the process itself. And I want to emphasize, before we even go any further, the flexibility that we have in the circle. There are ways to be very creative. I tried to bring out some of that flexibility in the BP oil spill example. That was a part of that article that was recommended reading early on. There's also a powerful example with the Columbine mass shooting, where 12 students were killed, 1 teacher, 24 other people injured, tremendous harm. The perpetrators committed suicide, so obviously they weren't going to participate in the circle, but the community came together and, informed by restorative justice, implemented various techniques to get to healing, to get to repair, to get so many voices heard. So there's really no limits to how we can support restoration and healing. And one of the resources I'll send you after our session tonight is an article about that Columbine response. Very inspiring. So does it take a lot to facilitate one of these circles? Well, the good news is you wouldn't be doing it alone. There would be three of you. And I say yes, it takes a fair bit of capacity. And I want to emphasize that there's lots of ways to support active peace circles besides facilitating them. They won't happen in the first place without a group of people making it happen, having the conversations, promoting it, doing that groundwork, doing that preparation work. And the rest flows pretty organically, I think. So the first stage would be welcoming people, helping them really arrive, relax, explaining the 5 R's, the ground rules. The next step, bring out the full extent of the harm. What happened? What were you thinking? This usually is a question for those who caused the harm. What relationships have been violated? Why are those relationships important? The full extent of the harm comes out right up front, all the ripple effects. And that may be as far as we get in a circle. That may be more than one circle, depending on the issue and the amount of harm and the number of people in the circle. It's not a phase to be rushed. Step 2, authentic, heartfelt responsibility is taken. That's a huge part of the process, looking people in the eye as the one who caused the harm and taking responsibility. It doesn't necessarily mean an apology. That might be something that comes out organically. It's not usually something that's requested because that can often not be authentic. Step 3, repair, healing. Using what we call SMART guidelines. Repair items, action items that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, timely. And I will say here that there are scripts that facilitators tend to use in the beginning that help you as a facilitator walk through these stages, feel relaxed, not miss anything important. And again, in an active peace circle, we want to include system level change. We want to address underlying beliefs and assumptions. We want to break the cycles of violence and disrespect and harm. And it gets written up in a contract. Here are the things that are going to be done to repair the harm. Here's the deadline. And that gets signed by everyone in the circle. It's an official document, not legally binding, but official. It's a good faith agreement that helps hold the integrity of the process. And we'll take questions after I go through these ground rules really quick, and I'm actually not going to go through them because I sent these in advance. So you have these. I just have a look at them now. I really just want to make the point of how they really take the 5 R's and all of the principles that we've talked about, and they really focus that energy on behavior that's appropriate and helpful, restorative in the circle. So these ground rules are a pivotal part of the process. Everyone does agree to them willingly, right up front, the beginning of the circle, and as a part of the preparation phase as well. So, breathing, and we have some time for questions and comments. So please unmute yourself. I will also go ahead and pause the sharing here. There is also a raise hand feature if you know where that is in your control panel. If you have a question and want to want to be heard that way. But feel free to unmute yourself if you have anything now. Sherab.
Thanks, Scott. I found that in situations like this, it is good to have two facilitators, but that it should be gender balance, no matter what the topic, really. It doesn't necessarily have to be a gender issue, no matter what the topic, because participants, there's men and women, so the team of facilitators have to reflect that. And also, I wonder why you're making one a lead, because they could be co-leads. And I also wonder, why did you mention that the note taker is the one that calls the breaks? Or maybe I heard that wrong. That part I'm not 100% sure, because I think that's in the domain of the facilitators.
It would be. So those are all excellent points. And I am very much in agreement on the gender balance. And the idea of what I said was that third facilitator could be someone who is holding the whole energy of the circle, that's a focus. There's a lot to attend to. I mean, imagine 20 people in a circle.
Oh, yeah.
And I think any one of the facilitators would have the authority to call a break, to call a timeout.
Yeah.
And sometimes, in my experience with restorative justice circles, it is very much a co-led process. My experience with facilitation in general is that it is usually going to run smoother if there's one, if there are some designated roles. And if a lead facilitator is
you can be co-facilitators with designated roles without having hierarchy, like one leads. That's all I'm noticing.
Yeah, well, and I'm not dictating any of that here. I mean, that would be up to you and your group and your facilitators. Anybody else? Okay, we're gonna go back in then. So we're in our breakout. We're going to go into the breakout group. I can tell you're saving your energy for that. I appreciate that. And it's the same scenario as last time. Nothing has changed in terms of the scenario, only your role is different. So thanks to the work of the leadership team, an initial circle has come together. You will be participating in the circle as a community member, representing either the circle of friends. Remember, there's a tight-knit group of friends that have been shaken, or the community at large. So you choose which of those communities you want to represent. Choose only one for the purposes of our exercise. Use the supporting questions as your guide. And again, this is a very important role, the community member role. So I want you to feel into even the most subtle ways that the harm ripples out, including the persistent systemic nature of this kind of, how this kind of harm impacts the community, how the systemic, persistent nature of that impacts the community. Align yourself with the 5 R's and the ground rules. Manage your time as a group in a way that allows each question to be addressed, each voice to be heard. Here are the questions. I hope you have them. I sent them in advance. So again, it will be half an hour. It's 5 questions. So it's a little over 5 minutes per question. And again, I would recommend having a facilitator, somebody to just really help get all the voices heard. And if somebody would be willing to volunteer for that up front, I think that would be helpful. It doesn't not have to happen that way. And remember that this is practice. Cut yourself some slack. Let yourself be less than perfect. And any final questions before we go into the group? I see a few things in the chat.
I have a question, Scott.
Yeah.
So we don't actually have an offender and the harmed party here. Is that correct?
We do. We have, it's the same scenario as last time. So it's still our inappropriate touching without
Wait.
consent.
Is someone taking the role of those people?
No,
That's what I thought.
right. Yeah, you are all just practicing
Support
being in the
community.
community role.
Okay, gotcha. Thank
Okay.
you.
And I see somebody asked about the questions. If you don't have those, didn't get those in advance for whatever reason, hopefully somebody else in your group has them. So with that, I'm going to...
When did you send those 5 questions?
Yesterday with the Zoom link.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to pause. So I would love to hear reflections, takeaways. Does anybody want to share anything with the big group?
Well, one of the things that our group talked about was James might be saying, well, this is how I was raised, you know, that boys should do this, girls like it, blah, 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 as kind of a focal point for the discussion where when he takes into consideration how it affected her, then there's a lead into a path to change his behavior. But that it's important for him to be able to say how his thinking, what was he thinking, and how his thinking impacted what he did, how his upbringing or whatever. So that was just one thing in our group.
Yeah. Well, good. And that, you know, I mean, he would be speaking to the systemic nature of this kind of abuse, right? And so, you know, the question for the community member in that regard is, how does that ripple out to impact the community? You know, how does that impact girls and, you know, their socialization, and how does it impact boys? And, you know, there's a lot to unpack around just that much, right?
Right.
So thank you. Lori.
Well, we found it challenging to be the people that we were without having the actual people there. We were doing a pretty good job for a while, but maybe we were overthinking it. Although is it Cal? Cal had great questions, follow-up questions whenever we went around with our questions, and that I thought that really helped us a lot. So I appreciated that. And so we had Kate's friend, James' friend, someone was Bob, and then I was the person who hosted the party, and so that's how we played it. And there was a very good question about, well, do I feel a sense of responsibility about what happened? And I thought that was a really good question, and I thought, yes, if you're hosting a party, then you have a responsibility. And so going forward, one, I might be hesitant to host a party. However, if I did host a party, I would take that being responsible a little more serious, and be proactive about having clear guidelines so people feel safe. And I would want to have buy-in that people are going to feel safe at this party. And if someone's creating a situation where someone's not feeling safe, that they would be asked to leave. So
Yeah.
We did not get to the fifth question, but I thought it was a really interesting exercise, and I loved the group, the people that I was in the breakout room. You were all just so thoughtful and wonderful. So just want to say
it sounds like you did a real full-on attempt at that. And yeah, what you are speaking to as the host of the party, I mean, that's a tremendous ripple effect, right? It impacts the way you're going to think about parties for a long time to come, right? And safety. And so, yeah, I appreciate.
Which is kind of a systematic change in how you would have a party, right? You know,
yeah.
Normally you don't do that when you have a party. You just invite your friends.
Just have a party, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Anybody else?
My hand is raised.
Okay, good. I please go.
Okay. So I was thinking that just as a thought experiment, let's say that this party happened in a frat house, and that's the small subset, and then a university would be the community at large, quote unquote. I think the fear would be that this type of behavior was normalized within that subset of individuals, and therefore, there would be anxiety about going into that space again, that, within this close-knit group of people, it's become normalized to exact sexual abuse. And the fact that Bob, says that it's not a big deal, I think it's Bob, sort of reifies that
the friend. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's all I have to contribute.
Well, and Jeffrey, so the safety issue there, explain that to me a little more. Where does that come into the circle process?
Oh, so we were talking about how this impacts the community at large. That was one of the questions. And so my piece was that it impacts the community because there becomes a stigma about that small subgroup, that those individuals have normalized this type of behavior.
Right. Yeah, and there's very likely some truth to that too, right? It's been normalized, and it's likely to keep happening, unless there's something that breaks the cycle, or several interventions that can break the cycle. Yeah, thank you. Anybody else?
Dennis, I just would like to point out in our group, one of the things that came up is that in terms of the community, it's not necessarily a negative effect. It could be a positive effect in that it brings awareness to the community that, yes, this specific situation happened to these people, but already we know in the entire community this type of thing happens often. And if we can find a way of talking about it, dealing with it, bringing awareness to the community, then it's a positive element.
Absolutely. That's a huge part of why we're doing it, right? That's also a ripple effect that comes through our willingness to engage in this, and our ability to pull it off. Again, it may not it may not come off the way that we intend. And that's why all the preparation and all the principles. And yeah, I wanted to raise something. It goes back to the earlier presentation. Somebody asked in the chat what the note taker takes notes about. And I just want to make sure I cover that because I feel like it's really important. So, and would they do that just kind of on a regular piece of paper, or would they do it like on a big piece of paper on the wall? So right off the bat, you want to start capturing the harm, just as, you know, as facilitators, so that you can then present the full extent of the harm to the whole group when you get to that stage. But you want to be noting the harm. You want to be noting responsibility when it's taken. You know, things that are said that suggest that this person is willing to take responsibility. Any particular feelings or needs. This is just for you as facilitators that may need to be addressed. And then during the repair stage, you're going to want to have outlined all of the harm, and that probably goes well on a large sheet of paper up on the wall. And you want to be capturing all of the, you're going to brainstorm that. So everyone in the circle is going to get a chance to put in their ideas around repairing the harm. No right, no wrong. Just throw your ideas out, and then we'll go back and we'll see what we can get consensus on. So that's kind of the idea of a note taker. Any other? I see Sharon has raised her hand.
Yeah, you know, it's occurs to me that the word harm, I kind of have my idea of what harm is. Mm. And I have a sense that there's a social agreement to that. And I would imagine part of the process is to really tease apart from the person who has been harmed and the person who has done the wrongdoing, so to speak. I mean, harm may not even be anywhere in the mind. I'm just kind of teasing out or playing with the word harm may not be necessarily as shared as I assume. And I would love to know whether that's an accurate question or process that happens.
And are you equating harm in this context with something like impact?
Yes, impact. That.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think that because that's what would bring people together in the first place, that would get clarified over time, and hopefully at least not just the facilitators, everybody would have a pretty clear idea of what we were going to be dealing with in the circle. You know, what is the harm that is going to be addressed, because that's all come out in our preparation. And there may be coaching that has to happen around getting people ready to understand that that's harm, because one of the ways I'm understanding your question is like degrees, right? Like what might be clearly harm to me, significant impact, worth repairing, may not rise to that level with somebody else. So we're going to unpack that. And that's another way the community can step in and affirm certain kinds of harm, that yes, indeed, you know, that this ripples out to affect the community, and it's significant, and it, yeah, there's a way that it harms, damages, impacts our sense of safety, trust, whatever it might be. So I don't know if that helps or not. We're going to need to move on. And again, there's the Google Doc for additional questions, follow-up questions. So I have a little bit of time to add in a little piece around what I call restorative communication. And I added in because the way we communicate is so key to whether or not we're showing up nonviolently in our relationships and our engagement with issues. And what I really want to highlight here is the work of one of my primary teachers around communication. It's Robert Gonzalez, who really took nonviolent communication and took it to a very deeply spiritual level. And he calls his work Living Compassion. And here are some of the main principles of that work. There is only one life energy, one life force. Life energy moves in and through the human being and manifests through the heart as longing, yearning, valuing, needing. Relating to our universal needs as life energy sets up a paradigm shifting way of communicating and opens up the possibility of transforming pain into more aliveness and deeper alignment with life. So the point I want to make is when you tune into your needs, your heartbreak, the needs of others, their heartbreak in this way, you align with life. It's not personal anymore. It's life energy moving, wanting alignment, wanting healing, wanting you and this relationship in question to be fully alive. And there's naturally more clarity, more courage, and more resilience when we can relate to our pain in this way. And one of the exercises I'm going to give you after this session, I call transforming pain. And it's really working with this way of viewing needs and longing and pain. And it aligns with the bearing witness practice that I already gave you. And it's the one practice that I would really highlight above all the others. And I'm gonna give you the transforming pain exercise that will come after our session tonight. And so the foundations, essentials flowing out of this session are 2 core values of nonviolence. And we already had that connection to the deep longing as a foundation. And so I'm just tweaking that to really add in the connection to the deep longing and the life energy of that longing. And if you do the practice, you'll get a sense for that. It's a way to transform grief, any kind of a pain, and I feel like it's an incredibly valuable practice right now. So the resources, the practice I just mentioned, a couple of websites, well, one website, the Center for Justice and Reconciliation, and I really want to highlight the online library that they have. You can search, for example, hate crimes and get a list of articles, resources around restorative justice practices specific to hate crimes. The traumatized school settings is an article having to do with Columbine that I mentioned. And then the teacher that I just mentioned, Robert Gonzalez, has a very beautiful book that I'm going to recommend. And a final quote for this evening from Gandhi: "I am but a weak aspirant, ever failing, ever trying. My failures make me more vigilant than before and intensify my faith. I can see with the eye of faith that the observance of the twin doctrines of truth and nonviolence has possibilities of which we have but very inadequate conception. I feel the same way about active peace circles. There is unlimited, unfathomable potential and ripple effects. Where there's trust, where there's respect, where there's a circle, anything is possible." So thank you for being here yet again. And let's say good night.
Good night.
Good night. Good night. Remember the Google Doc. We have only one more session, so it's a great time to be getting in your questions there. And I'll again put that link in the resources in the email I'll send. So I'll see you next week for our final session. Thank you all.
Good night,
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, Debbie.
Thanks, all.
Mhm.